Hello, everyone, and welcome to what Women in Parks and Recreation presents as the Capital Improvement Project Learning Series. We are truly excited about this opportunity and looking forward to gaining wonderful information from our presenters on today. Couple of housekeeping notice. Do not wait until the last minute. We want to hear from you throughout the session. So please, in the chat box, drop those questions, make those comments, and ask for those clarifications. You will be participating in a few polls. We're only using this information so that we can ensure that the information delivered to you was what you needed, what you wanted, and also will help us as we continue throughout this series. You asked for it, we delivered. So now I'm going to turn this over to, and again, I'm Lakita Frazier-Watson, and I'm the CEO of Women in Parks and Recreation. We're joined here by our board members, Mrs. Melanie Scoggins-White, as well as Katie Keller. All righty, so Lisa has been working with us. She's a phenomenal bad woman whom I truly enjoy working with. She has been in our field for a number of years, a part of the academy, but I'm gonna let her tell you all that other great stuff. She'll be facilitating this for us today, and we are sponsored by a partner, and she'll introduce and share with you about what she does with Very Done. So, Lisa.
Hey, Lakita, thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. This is great. As Lakita said at the end of her statement earlier, you asked, and we're hopefully delivering today. There were a few people who reached out saying they really wanted some guidance and some best practices on capital planning. And for some reason, my name got thrown in the mix. And here I am to gather a couple of really great people out of the myriad of great people who do this kind of work every day and who have shown us some really amazing best practices. Chosen here today are Stephen Bentley and Patrick Hammer. But a little bit about myself, I think you maybe know my name, but my name is Lisa Paradis, and I'm the business development and strategy lead for the practice area of Very Done. We do consulting in all forms of consulting for parks, recreation, and libraries, and we're all over the country. So we see a lot of this kind of work happening. We're on the other side of it, though, helping organizations and agencies tee up their ask for bond measures oftentimes, or for approval for new budgets, and really helping to shape the future of the agencies and the communities in which they serve. A little bit about myself too. I was a practitioner for 26 years as a director, most recently in Brookline, a part of Boston, Mass. I work remotely out of Boston, currently in sunny Florida, where I just finished up a site visit in Sanibel. I know you're all jealous, but I got to see the sun outside the windows for about 8 hours every day while I was there, unfortunately. But it was actually a beautiful spot. So there are some really great benefits to consulting rather than being on the director side. But that said, really excited to have you here. And I'm going to introduce our two rock stars today who are going to lead us through some of the work that they've done. I chose and reached out to these two people because I know their work. They've done hundreds of millions of dollars of projects, overseen hundreds of millions of projects within their agencies. And I felt like one was from Colorado and one is from the East Coast in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I thought it was an even mix of people from all over the country. And let me tell you a little bit about Stephen Bentley. Stephen is an assistant director in the Raleigh Parks Department in North Carolina. Raleigh continues to be one of the fastest growing areas in the United States, and the park system contains 10,000 acres, 120 miles of paved greenways, and they have over 40 staffed facilities, a broad array of athletic fields, courts, and aquatics opportunities. Stephen's role in the department is to oversee communications, technology, planning, and physical development of the park system. His professional work is led by the values of honesty, adaptability, empathy, and inclusion. Love that. He has a master's degree from Michigan State University and has worked for park systems in the federal, state, county, and municipal levels of government. So that's Stephen and Patrick Hammer. Our friend from Colorado is the Director of Parks and Recreation for the town of Erie, Colorado, which is one of the fastest growing communities in the state. Under Patrick's leadership, he has 40 full-time and over 200 part-time employees in the system, and he manages and maintains the Erie Community Center, over 20 parks and more than 60 miles of trails, 1,500 acres of open space and agricultural land, and countless essential programs and services. Over the last 2 years, Erie has been the recipient of over $2 million in grant funding for parks and recreation specific initiatives, and they have completed over $15 million worth of new and replacement capital projects. Patrick is a lifelong Parks and Rec professional. He has a BS in Rec Administration from the University of Northern Colorado and an MS in Management and Strategic Business Development from Colorado State University. He has taken special interest in strategic capital asset planning and open space and land preservation in an effort to secure quality natural landscapes in the midst of Colorado's rapid residential and commercial growth. Patrick is a strong proponent of community placemaking, which you'll hear a lot about today from him, using parks and public space and streetscapes combined with cultural arts to build a sense of place and belonging. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think Stephen's going to start us off. He's going to share his screen, and we're going to roll from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Melanie and Katie for giving us the opportunity. Patrick and I are excited. I see some familiar names. So let me hit the share button here, share screen. It looks like Lakita, you need to allow me to share the screen. Just let me know when and I'll try it again. There we go. Thank you. All right. I'm assuming everybody can see the screen now. So thanks again for allowing us to join you all today. We're really excited about the opportunity to share our content with everybody. We have about 30 slides. We'll try to get a good rhythm, but we'll make a couple breaks during the presentation. There's questions that can be put forth in the chat, and Lisa will prompt Patrick and I to roll with it. You've heard a little bit about us already.
Stephen, let me just interrupt. You might want to swap the displays because we see your presenter display.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
I've done that before and nobody told me, but I'm telling you.
That's what I want. Thank you.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, yep,
Thanks.
that's perfect. Absolutely. And I'm going to minimize. Okay, perfect. So this is part of a 3-part series. Today, we're going to talk big picture about capital planning. The next segment will be in March. We're going to talk about opportunities and different methodologies for funding capital projects. And then we're going to talk about delivering, so the actual manifestation of all this work and planning that we undertake. Hold on. Let me get this right. All right. So we really are looking at today's agenda to be around 3 core areas: good data, the importance of engagement, and aligning your capital plans with other plans across your city and municipalities. And then how you can take that data, engagement, and planning and create good criteria to score projects that help inform your decision-making. And then the importance of putting in good systems into place. And then we'll wrap up with just some hot topics out there in the field that are influencing capital planning. So we wanted to make sure to talk about today is that this is scalable. So I'm going to talk about Raleigh. I'll talk about some other work, but size and scale of your department, we understand different resource opportunities, but I feel what we're proposing today, you can right size that for your community. We're also going to talk about capital planning from a building and capital development and capital maintenance standpoint, not like the procurement of equipment and the vehicles. And we're going to define capital projects for today's conversation as any project over $25,000. Just check with your where you work. Each city, town, and system has different definitions for that. And we came up with a really broad definition for capital planning. It's really forecasting what you need over a defined period of time. It helps you with predictability, some stability in your financial planning, and then also helps set some expectations with your community on what's coming over the next few years. So I think about capital planning from the three-legged stool. First, we're going to talk about data. Then we're going to talk about how and the importance of it and who you're serving, who you're not, the condition of your assets. How are you engaging the community on their capital needs and ensuring what you're proposing in your capital plan aligns with not only other plans within your city, but also your region and partnership opportunities. We'll then move to how you take all of that information, that three-legged stool, and basically move it to help defining some criteria that will help develop some priority and matrix for you to go to your elected officials or your peers and say, here are my priorities. I've quantified them. We're also going to talk a little bit about, you do create a score out of some criteria, but other things are going to impact those scores in your decision to put projects in a capital plan. So data, we'll talk about data first. I think as a profession, we're getting much better, but we still need some improvement on telling our story about what we do, our importance, how we are vital and essential. Obviously, we've been talking about that a lot the last few years. Where I think we can get better at is looking at our demographics on who we're serving, who we're not serving. Do those people have equitable access to these services and facilities? And all of this impacts your investments in your capital plans. Historic investments. Where and when have you spent your last 10 years of resources? And then finally, the importance of collecting really good information in different formats on really the physical condition of your parks, your amenities, and facilities. So, we've talked a lot the last decade about, as a profession, who are we really serving and who are we not? And the importance of stepping back, reflecting and looking forward about where we're making our investments and the most important communities who need those investments. And that should be vital when you're looking at your capital planning. And I have some examples on how Raleigh approaches it. I know you're collecting visitation data, participation data, and revenues. Those are all important. But how are you looking at, through your development of a 5 or 10 year capital plan based on equity? In Raleigh, we've partnered with Wake County. Our county is Wake County in North Carolina, and we've created a community vulnerability index, and that's based on a number of factors. I have 5 listed here: employment rates, educational attainment, age dependency, housing vacancy, and poverty levels. So on this map, it's basically a map of the city of Raleigh. The darker purple, the higher probability of vulnerable populations exist in that area. We utilize this index when we look at every single project above $25,000 and programs and services. I'm just using it for today for our capital planning discussion, but we also use it on where we are targeting different programmatic opportunities within the city. Oops, sorry. So access to parks. One of the things that we need to continue to focus on as a profession is, when we're making investments, are we putting parks and developing parks and placemaking opportunities in locations that need it the most? And are we reducing barriers? Are we providing opportunities near transit stop if you have a barrier to a vehicle? Schools, so proximities to working with our youth, so we can leverage those resources with our educational system. And then other partners. When you're making your capital planning decisions, are you ensuring that you're going above being compliant for ADA? And so overall, how are your investments removing barriers to access, increasing safety and quality of experience? I have at the last slide, one of the things we're really looking at more and more is defining quality, because each person's basically life story tells them on what they judge a quality park system as and park amenities as. So access. So in Raleigh, we've created this access model looking at your physical proximity to a park. It's based a lot on the 10-minute walk campaign that NRPA and Trust for Public Land have been advocating. And we've created a scorecard for our city. So green, we're doing good. Lighter green, it's A, B, C, D, and F. If you're in a red area, you are not being served within a 10-minute or actually a 2-mile radius of a park. So we layer this information with our equity information, and that helps drive where we want to make our investments next based off data sources. Historic investment, again, I talked about it a little bit earlier. When's the last time you spent $1 in a park or at a community center? The same, like where is that money going across the city? What we have done as a city is map that, and then we provide this information to our elected officials. So in this case, the larger the circle, the more money that has been spent. And this is based over about a 10-year period. Becomes a really good visual tool to see where you are spending your dollars. So if you layer the equity information, the access information, where you're spending your dollars, it really drives a good visual narrative to your community and elected officials on how and where and when we should be applying our capital dollars. So the last segment I'll talk about in data is condition assessments. This doesn't have to be fancy. We still do a lot of stuff by paper, but we're moving a lot to capturing stuff with cell phones, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But really, what is the condition of your parks, facilities, playgrounds, swimming pools, addressing life safety, accessibility. It'd be great to have things rotate on an every 10 or 15-year schedule, but the reality is you have to prioritize your dollars. And then just overall wear and tear. So if you take equity, access, and condition assessments on where you're spending your money, you layer this information, and ultimately you'll look at how you can make better informed decisions. Some of the tools we're using in Raleigh and across the board in asset management across the country, robust GIS systems. We're using a tool called CityWork. So every time a work order is placed on something to be repaired, we can capture that. A lot of Microsoft tools people are familiar with, but what we're moving towards is using Power BI, which is business intelligence. So it pulls our visitation data, pulls our revenue data, our work order data, and we can see where spatially in the city of Raleigh where we're spending our dollars and the last time we spent dollars. So it's another visualization tool. We also
Hey,
are using—
Stephen,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt right there because I do think that that was something that people may have a question about. I'll drop in some information about Microsoft Power BI, but and I'm saying this because in our dry run, we had some questions about that for Stephen as well. It seems like a really cool integration management system, and it does, by Stephen's account, it does that Microsoft tool actually pulls from external platforms. So if anyone has questions about that, we can save those till the end, but I'm happy to provide a little bit more information about Power BI.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a really powerful tool. We use Vermont Systems, so we're pulling our stuff from Vermont Systems. We combine it with, we use PeopleSoft for our financial tool as a city. And it really, now I'm not doing any of this. We have really great staff that do it, but once they get into it, and they really just send you a link and you're able to look at different graphs and charts visually, I think that you can take a lot of data that's complicated, distill it down and show people visually, and it makes a compelling story. I think some people on this call probably are familiar with See-Click-Fix, which is basically you take a picture of something and you upload it. We are using that a lot for like playground repairs, wherever we have problems with facilities and repairs that are needed. And then some, I mentioned earlier, we're pulling from our recreation management system. And then I talked about scalability. We actually trained all of our park maintenance staff to use a collector app for GIS on their cell phone. So they took a picture, they give it a rating, they come back, plug in, and it's downloaded, and our GIS staff person then puts it into our database. And that's important because we have everything down to a park bench and the condition and a picture of it. And I think that's just a way to build your inventory by cross-training staff. We rely a lot on our transportation partners to help us. I think it's really important to pay people to go out and do assessments for you, since you get caught up in your own work. We've had volunteers come forward, that people that are familiar with technology have gone out and collected information for us. And then obviously university systems, depending on where you live, can also be a really big help. So I'm going to pause. I don't know if we want to field some questions now, but that really covers the data portion of it. And before I turn it over to Patrick, I'll check with Lisa.
Thanks, Patrick. If anyone wants to ask any questions, you can either throw them in the chat or we can have a minute or so to do that now. Otherwise, we'll move on to the poll question that Lakita is throwing up there right now, which is awesome. And if you can weigh in on the poll question, then we'll compile those while Patrick is starting his part of this presentation too.
And Patrick, you should be able to share on your own.
Okay, let me. Actually, you know what, Bentley? Let's see if I can.
I got you. If you want me to
Yeah,
tell.
let's do that. That way, if you're fine just rolling with it. Yeah, if you could switch over to that next slide. So what I hope everybody is starting to feel is that these are kind of these data-driven decisions. And as you're collecting nuggets throughout this process and we transition into this engagement mindset, I like to think of it as this convergence of capital, right? Physical capital, and we're starting to bring in this human capital. And if you've been existing on this planet for the last couple of years, you've realized that humans communicate vastly different, and it's very progressive. And one of the things I would like to start with is if you are using techniques to engage with your public that are 2, 3, 4 years old, now may be the time to think about it differently. We've challenged ourselves here to think of engagement in terms of building trust and meaning, moving past that checkbox that I think a lot of us in this industry, when we first started with capital projects, well, I'm going to do a survey. I'm going to do a couple of open houses. We're going to do some design charrettes. But if we were to look at several layers under that, you'll find that there's a separate layer of communication and meaning. And it plays well into this idea of truly being diverse, equitable, inclusive with how we look at telling our story. And if you think about how important this piece is of you're getting to build something on behalf of somebody else. And talk about just a meaningful and beautiful opportunity to take something that your community wants, let them be a part of that process, and then have this end result that they get to enjoy. So again, coming from this position of you really need to give in your engagement process to receive valuable information back, all while setting realistic expectations and keeping people interested in the project. So we've got a couple of continuums here, and I think Lisa might have put it up earlier. These are not proprietary to Erie Parks and Rec by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a couple of great organizations out there that talk about meaningful public engagement and fairly progressive public engagement. We know that trust in local government at times waxes and wanes. We all have felt that. But what you'll see here on the upper left is this idea of a continuum of public engagement. And really, this is designed to set realistic expectations and identifying when and how to engage your community at the right time with the right amount of decisions. Oftentimes, it's been my experience in capital projects that you'll have really vested community members who actually want to be all the way at the end with you. They want to be on site. They want to help build. And that maybe isn't the most appropriate place for them to be involved. So I'd really like everybody to think about, does your organization have an existing community engagement tool? What is your role in this engagement tool? Is that tool allowing for as many diverse opinions, opportunities? Are you meeting people truly at those levels where they are? And over here on the right, you'll see if you've got a robust engagement plan in place, you're ultimately aiming towards building trust. If you picture yourself in your community, nobody wants to have projects kind of rammed down your throat. there is this art to really bringing your community along with you. And if you have a system that's well thought out and you can build that trust, you're closing the communication loop, right? You hold a community meeting, you offer some type of experience where people get to give you feedback. You follow back up and allow individuals to know that they're heard. You capture and analyze what you're hearing, and then showing that you're making educated decisions on behalf of the community. And again, speaking to removing barriers to entry and reaching beyond the self-selectors. Now more so than before in Parks and Recreation, our need to look at things through the DE&I lens and making informed decisions on our public infrastructure, parks included, with everybody's heart and mind involved, is so critically important. So if you've got a takeaway from this slide, and hopefully you'll have lots of takeaways, but please, let's start moving our engagement past the checkbox. Like Bentley mentioned, we know that you're collecting data. Chances are you're doing the same things, like, I'm going to do this survey. We all have websites now, we all have Facebook. What does that next layer of meaningful community engagement look like? And I'll tell just a really quick story before we transition on to the next slide, but I've been in the town of Erie for two and a half years, and we've got a handful of capital projects out there, and we were really invested in this idea of being really diverse and wanting to engage. And I had an amazing conversation with somebody who I actually now consider a friend, and she came up to me at the end of the meeting. I'd never met her before, and she said, "Patrick, everything you do is pumpkin spice latte." And I actually didn't. I said, "Okay, probably." Walk me through that one. And it was amazing. She said, "You're an educated white male who's in a position of power, who has probably looked at Parks and Recreation through a lens that you grew up with, in the community you grew up around, by parents who clearly invested, because I'm an outdoor person, my experience in Parks and Recreation." And she just plainly said, "When I walk around the town of Erie, everything to me looks like it's been designed and built by educated white people who were probably interested in design in the late 90s and early 2000s. That has been the most influential conversation I've had in terms of public engagement. And anytime I feel like we are getting a little bit stagnant in the town of Erie, or I don't feel like we're actually trying as hard to capture true opinions, I will remind myself that, and our staff, that I think we're starting to feel and taste a little bit like pumpkin spice latte. And to that, getting real feedback is ultimately what we want. I could have easily shown you 50 things where people were like, "Oh my gosh, that's a beautiful park." This statement to me has meant more than anything. So if we can kind of just quickly transition on to that next slide. I'll tell another kind of quick story. You're going to see 3 images over on the right side. This was my first experience at trying to take a public engagement, community engagement process to the physical space where we were intending to build something. Again, kind of reverting back, I'm assuming that most on this call have great websites. We've got great surveys. We've probably got amazing marketing departments. All those tools are super effective, assuming that people are comfortable communicating on those platforms. So one of the ideas that I absolutely love is, let's say you're building a park. Can you create the engagement conversation within that physical park space? I tell you, it makes things a lot easier saying, this is how big an actual parking lot is. There's an overhead power line. We have utilities that we need to factor in. So again, allowing people to kind of vision with you and problem solve with you. Are there possibilities that you can actually turn the community engagement process into a celebratory event? You'll see, if you can see in the image, we've got a map of a community that I used to work in, and it says, find your happy place. What I didn't ever want to do as a director is to assume that I understood where everybody's important places were. And very much like Stephen's maps, this is just a smaller scaled down version of that. Stephen and I felt that it was really important to let everybody know our communities are vastly different in size, but he and I actually implement the very same tools. This is just an old school version of it. And then the other pictures, what you'll see is we wanted the community to start to design the look and the feel and the colors within our future community center. So we actually hired artists for the day to come out so we could start to see and feel and smell and listen to what the community wanted to see. And that really kind of ties into this idea of public engagement over the last, call it 20, 30 years, if it was done at all, was assuming that people wanted to communicate vocally or in writing. And what we have learned is that that's not always the best way to communicate. If you ask somebody, hey, what do you want in a park? They're likely going to tell you they want something that's an improvement over something they don't like in another park. But if you say, hey, help me vision that, let's play. Can you engage kids in an event to watch them play? Can art tell a story? Can you sit and listen? I made a very critical error young in my career, assuming that people wanted a playground. Well, what I realized is I pushed forward with that project, not realizing that I was taking away spaces where active adults in the community actually used to like to sit and have coffee and just watch wildlife. I didn't listen to that story. If you do that, I think you can do things like diffuse anger and opposition. You create this idea of diversification of ideas, and you really shake up the communication system. And you can do things like stopping the last word wins. I don't know about everybody's experience, but I have gotten to the very end of a project and I was excited and ready to present it. And it's funny, I call them the green shirts, because all of a sudden my item comes up and there's about 30 people in green shirts just waiting for public comment. That's tough for an elected official to argue against, right? When you shake up that communication system, just like we saw Stephen and how great their community does at pulling data points. Effective community engagement is pulling data points. You're mixing the capital, your human capital with your tangible capital. And then before we transition off here, just this idea of, if you're not familiar with what listening lenses are, do a quick Google search. When we're doing engagement, are we listening to problem solve? Are we listening because we're frustrated and we're told we have to? Are we listening to truly understand? Are we problem solving? I think it's really important that we're in a place of receiving, right? We give the opportunity for engagement, we receive valuable information. So a good takeaway, keep those listening lenses. Some places will say there's 3, some will say there's 5, some will say there's 7. If you're interested in just looking at different perspectives, go and check that out. Transition to that next one. Really quickly here, if you think of the engagement process as who's involved, and we've got, as you can see here, community members, staff, advisory board members. You may have brought in some design engineers. You may have some contractors already helping you out. You obviously have elected officials. Stephen and his staff doing a phenomenal job at interdepartmental work, which I think is fantastic. But if you were to actually put pen to paper and quantify the number of people that are captured within these subcategories right here, it's hundreds of people. How are you, as the capital project manager, through public engagement, keeping that ship moving, right? We live in a time frame right now that's microseconds. Our phones pull us this way, internet pulls us this way, emails pull us this way, board meeting agendas, elections. Being able to keep that vision, keep the heart, the soul, mix that with that good data, it's a huge role for capital planners. I know, having listened now to Stephen as we've walked through this, and how they do communication in Raleigh, I'm stealing ideas from him. You know, I think we all, if you've been in this kind of capital world, people love to rewrite history. People love it. By the beginning of a project to the end of it, it's like a bad game of telephone. You may have told somebody, yeah, I think we might be able to add some parking spaces. And then by the end of it, somebody shows up and says, well, I talked to Patrick at the very first community meeting. He said it was 75 parking spaces. That's what I heard. Keeping that vision. And then really quickly, I'll just share this picture here. When I got to Erie, we reached out to the local schools and asked if they'd be interested in a civics related curriculum to teach young people about community building. So everything from first graders up to fifth graders at certain schools who have selected in actually get to design and build their own parks. My staff and I then go and engage with the kiddos, and we have committed to the kids that we will, when we can, take an idea from each design concept and incorporate it into an actual park. So again, just another fun way to just shake up community engagement. And as you can see, this is my favorite picture because all on their own, I believe this is a first or second grade class. They actually came up with the name Free for Everyone Park, which is pretty amazing that kiddos have come up with that. And while I've got just another couple of quick seconds, this is something that I think Stephen kind of originally threw out there and loved it. But this idea that you don't have to do it all. You can build great capital projects through public-private partnerships, as long as you've got a fairly robust system of understanding where everybody's coming from. Again, this stuff isn't new or proprietary to Erie, but just wanted to let people know that capital project management can also be a partnership. And yeah, I think now we'll kind of bring this back around through kind of plan cohesion.
Thank you, Patrick. Lisa, should we keep rolling? You want to take, we got a poll.
Yep, so we can roll into the next one as people go ahead and answer the questions in the poll that just came up.
Gotcha. I answered it.
Lakita, just looking to find out when are we going to show the answers to those poll questions at the end?
Yes, that was my plan, madam.
Awesome. Yep.
That works for you.
Just wanted to let everybody know that. Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Patrick. I love how you framed it. And we transitioned from really data-centric to human-centric. The third leg of the stool that we've kind of batted around a little bit, Patrick and I, when we pulled this together, is the importance of what you're investing in, how it aligns with everything around you. There's probably no better profession than parks to really tie things together, from human health, the physical, environmental health, making sure everybody has equitable access to public amenities. So you all have comprehensive plans and strategic plans. I'm hoping everybody on this call is invested in a master plan for their park system. I want to focus on a couple other things. Make sure when you're looking at your own department plans that you're focusing on all the different areas. There is a propensity sometimes to look at the things that are most successful, but why are they most successful? Because are you funding them the more capital in different areas? The slide I really want to focus in on is the opportunity as parks departments to work with your peers. Looks like the poll came out. But as a parks department, I'd encourage all of you, because there's money in these pots, to work with your stormwater department. The opportunity for resiliency and collection of stormwater within your parks, transportation and trails. I have water and sewer up here because Lisa mentioned we have 120 miles of greenways in Raleigh. Over 60% of them are on a greenway, or I'm sorry, are on a sewer easement. So when a developer comes in and says, I need an easement, we ask them if we can put a greenway and sewer easement on it. So in the future, if they want a connection to a trail, we can go back and pave that trail. There's pockets of money now focusing on food security, housing, entrepreneurship and small business grants. Community centers are great hubs to bring people in and make improvements to your community center so everybody has access to good Wi-Fi, a printer. And it also is common space for everybody to come and share ideas, and possibly out of those ideas, a small business arises. And then really what I want to shift now to is, we talked about data, we talked about development of really robust listening and engagement and closing the feedback loop, understanding beyond data what your community wants, and how you can align all of that with your plans, to really shifting towards how can you take a project, or we'll say 20 projects that you're asked to prioritize, and develop a matrix in which you can actually score projects. So I put this table together as an example of one way in which you can do it. So if you have a project, I'll use what we talked about earlier, we use our equity index and we rate it on a 1 to 9. Well, we weight that higher than anything else. Is it improving access? Is the project improving access? We rate that on 1 to 7, but we weight that higher. So you can come up with your own scoring system and you can score projects. And the reason I encourage that, because when you're asked by an elected official or a community member or your budget office, you can say, here's my 10 projects and here's the scores and the criteria we use versus this is what staff generally thinks. Now with that, the scores only get you a list that looks good because there's a number associated with it. The reality is that as you move these projects forward, some might have to move up the list because you've had an elected official ask you for 3 years in a row, I really want you to do that project. Well, it doesn't score well. Eventually, it's a really good idea to move that project up the list because that little small win with that elected official may pay dividends for 5 other projects that you have coming in the future. Now, you can't do that all the time, but I think you just being honest with yourself, there are forces external to that number, criteria, and list that are going to influence what you're proposing. We all know that. Everybody on this call has experienced that. But we also look at, are these projects we're proposing as a priority, do they have a heavy impact on our operating budget? Are we going to get the staff to operate that new community center or to mow the grass on the field or to make sure the courts are being well maintained? Look at, are they a revenue generating facility? We talked about earlier, you might move a project up because it's going to be really successful in a grant application, or you have a nonprofit or private sector partner that wants to help fund it. If you take all the data, your community engagement, your plans, essentially layer that on top of one another. And it does not have to be in the form of a map. I know I've showed you a lot of maps, but really is the purpose is it's the way in which you can move projects towards priorities and be able to justify the decisions that you're making in your capital planning. Now we're going to wrap up the last 2 slides to talk about putting good systems into place, capital plans, 5 to 10 years, helps establish some financial predictability. Review your projects every year. I know you're putting together a 5 or 10-year plan. Have discussions either annual or biannually. The last 3 years, I'm sure a lot of our plans have changed now where we're pushing and pulling money through our park system. I'll talk a little bit about it in the last slide on hot topics, but really check your costs. Across the board, we increased things 13% over the last 2 years. I really think it's important having others outside of your department review projects and your priorities, the criteria that I talked about, so you have a different, fresh set of eyes to make sure you're not insular, kind of in your own thinking. And I mentioned earlier, be willing to pay a third party to help with some of your assessments. So put these systems into place, and it will help you with your predictability and moving projects forward. And then finally, getting back to what Patrick talked about, is be open and transparent. Close your feedback loop when you're talking with your community. I think it's extremely important when you have a project moving forward to engage your community about the status of it, the schedule of it, the look and feel. Possibly with boards and commissions, we periodically take out some of our boards and commissions to construction sites so they can see the work that it entails, and it builds excitement. And then when your plan, your draft plan comes forward, those next projects they're already excited about. Now, we talked about developing a 5 and 10-year plan. Well, let's be realistic. You have to be nimble. You have to be flexible. All of us have pivoted a lot the last couple of years in response to everything that we've dealt with from COVID and everything else that the country has gone through. So although I'm preaching planning, I want to ensure that we have to remain nimble and flexible. And then the hot topics, supply chain, we see it on the news. We recently had a project in which the entire park was completed except for our exterior lighting. And essentially we had to have a 3-month delay until our outdoor lighting arrived. So ironically, you see it on the news, ships being out to port. Well, that was a perfect example. We had a completed park besides light poles, and we just weren't willing to open up the park with generated and temporary lighting. We didn't think it looked good. I won't go into a lot about COVID, but I do think that we are all having open discussions about how our communities are choosing to live, work, and play. That's influencing our capital planning. Building for resiliency in our climate and our weather and our public health resiliency. And then just an emerging trend is, how are we collectively as a profession working with our community to talk about what does quality mean to you? And what is the quality of the space? If we're going to make a renovation, how can we make this reflective of what you not only you need, but it looks like and feels like and works within your community? And then the final one would be smart tech. We're doing some really interesting thing on counters. We had a student come forward from NC State who he would email us and say, every time I go to Kentwood Park, the courts are being used. And we were like, thank you, that happens. He came back 6 months later and he proposed putting a detector that has vibration. It's about the size of your cell phone on the back of a basketball court, a basketball board, and it relays to a little cellular repeater that is in our community center, and we can tell you when people are playing basketball. So it's fascinating where tech is going. And then as we look at temperature stations, are they being included into your new projects, different air filtration systems? So smart tech is going to influence what and where we are investing in. So I'm going to get to this. So we do have 2 more presentations. It'll be a different group of people, but we're going to go from this bigger picture discussion, a little bit about fundamentals on funding projects, and then finally, everything from hiring designers to construction, like the delivery of capital projects. And I would like to invite Patrick to make a plug for fundraising we're doing here.
You may have seen over, I guess it's been probably about a month now, that in Colorado, we had fairly catastrophic fire that came through and literally wiped out 2 huge sections of community. One where I actually ironically was the Parks and Rec director. We've had 18 of our Parks and Rec family members lose their homes to these fires. My boss has lost his home. A handful of our police officers have lost their home. This is a donation that the Colorado Parks and Rec Association has put together just to help those individuals specifically. It doesn't have anything to do with the larger rebuilding, but very specific to Parks and Rec brothers and sisters and family members within our profession who've been impacted by those fires. So this is the link to do that if you feel so inclined.
And I think Lisa was going to put that in the chat, right?
I actually don't have that link. There was I'm realizing it. Stephen, is there any way you can copy and paste it from your and throw it in? Thank you. I wasn't able to
follow
grab it.
up and
Yep,
with the
we'll throw it
individuals
in
that
there.
registered.
yeah.
I will be sending out a survey about today's session. It won't be long, but then we also can put that information in about donating to our brothers and sisters in Colorado that were impacted through this tragic weather. Lisa?
Great, thank you. So that's all that we have for presentation. I know there was a lot of information that was covered in the last, I guess, 51 minutes. So we've tried to leave as much time at the end of this open so that you can ask some questions. And really, I know sometimes people are a little bit shy about asking questions. We're all in the same business together. We all are in this fight together sometimes. So feel free. No question is too small to ask these guys.
Yes. Jackie asked a question earlier about how many staff members do you have designated to analyze the GIS data input before creating the visualizations to present to people?
Yeah, I can go first. We have 2 staff. We have a senior staff member, and then I'd say like a younger staff member that has come out of college and really revolutionized what we were doing. We had one person, we added this young employee, and he's like, oh, you should be doing it this way. And he was the one that said we should send our people who are doing our maintenance out with our phones to collect all this information. And he did it in 2 summers. And So we have 2 full-time staff that and that's a big resource to have 2 FTEs to do that. They also do other things like our programming data. They work with our RecTrack or our Vermont systems data. So not only the capital side, they're kind of like the data people for our whole department.
And Patrick, I know that you were about to say something. I'm curious about the impact with your, this is a hot topic, DEI, and actually doing it and not just checking off a box. Do you feel that your efforts have truly diversified and or opened up opportunities for people that were less served in your community?
I do. I'll be honest, where I am in Colorado is largely a white affluent community. It's forced us to move past that lens of just assuming, everybody kind of looks the same. That's not the case. We need to put in the work to communicate on a bunch of different levels. And as we've learned through COVID, impacts on parents has caused difference in communication. People in palliative care, caring for elderly family members, all that changes communication, all that weaves into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what it allowed us to do is create a system that can be built upon as Erie grows and ultimately becomes more diverse.
So there's a question here too. What software would you recommend to compile capital project data, project worksheets, asset management plans, et cetera? It is time consuming to update our project worksheets in Excel. No kidding. So let's hear what you have for some thoughts on that.
Patrick, you can go first if you'd like.
We use a contractual software. Ours is called Green City Solutions. It's a GIS-based software. But yeah, we moved past tracking in Excel documents because it was just too hard to keep up with. So as Stephen mentioned, our staff goes out and tracks assets with phones. So we know existing condition, and then as we build future infrastructure, that gets kind of added in, and our capital budgets and plans get built within that software.
Patrick, can you say that again? Brain City?
Green City.
Like brain in your head?
Green.
Green, got it. Sorry, maybe I was the only one who was, okay, thanks. I'll type it in.
We use Esri, a GIS software through Esri. Ironically, we only shifted to it about 3 years ago. So everything was done by spreadsheets. So again, I'll give credit to this young staff member that came in and was just like, you don't know what you're doing. You have all this stuff, and he automated us. And it's a big investment, but it has made tracking things a lot, reporting, pulling things out of Excel is a little bit, it's tough. And now we can pull it out of our GIS software. It's super helpful.
You said that twice, Stephen. And so I want to make sure that I reiterate that amongst our team. His willingness to be open to a younger employee's recommendations to make something better. I just wanted to reiterate that is so important for those of us that have been in the field, a little over 20, 30 years, some of us not dating ourselves. You can get caught up in how you've always done it, but is it still working that way? So I think that was an important takeaway for any project, is listening and being open to others that may not have as much experience, but have a different way of doing something.
It's an excellent point. I share this when I talk with other peers. The division I oversee, I'm the only person with a Parks and Rec background. The rest are artists. I have a person with an English degree, a tech degree. So really they brought like their interdisciplinary approach. They just love public spaces and public programs. They're committed to public work. And they've really forced as a department for us to think the way we do things differently versus this is the way Parks and Rec do it. They're like, no, you should be doing it like this. And it's been really helpful. And my peers in recreation and park maintenance all are like, wow, you just hired a person with an English degree, and they're amazing. But they're in our communications team, right? So it's, I think that's really important as a profession that we think about. Now, our park and rec background is really important, but being willing and open to bringing others in with different voices.
Krishan has her hand up. Let's hear it. Hi.
Thank you so much. This is really informative and great. So I appreciate this presentation. My question was too long to put in the chat, so I raised my hand. So I'm curious, you know, I'm not in a position right now to be the leader of some of this type of work, but I've seen a couple of different ways that we've done community engagement. Sometimes it's led by the consultant that we hire for the project. And then sometimes it's sort of a split between consultant and staff. Smaller projects are usually just staff, and some are very successful, some are not. And especially talking about some of the DEI approaches, I think can be really difficult sometimes depending on the consultant and where they're coming from in this type of mix. So I'm just sort of curious, is there a model that you think works best, doesn't work best? You know, we know our community sometimes better than a consultant may know our community, but how do you maybe marry those two, or is that not the way this should go?
Excellent question. We do a little bit of the same, though we're trending towards more in-house. And what we're working on currently, we were very happy. We hired a dedicated DE&I position for the town. Our DE&I principles and values will be woven into all contracts going forward. I tend to like to, I don't want to say dictate because I think that sounds harsh. It is very important for me that the consultants understand kind of the flavor and the feelings within our community. So we are very heavily involved, myself and our diversity, equity, and inclusion manager and our communications manager, on what all engagement processes look like. Subject specific, I'm not going to get up there and pretend that I could talk about park design, but we are heavily influential in what that looks like. I like to dictate, if we can, that engagement's done in the physical space, just because I think that helps. But for us, we're moving towards more of a split, if not the town taking over the greater control of it.
And we're a split. We've had a couple of projects knowing the community we were working within was going to be really challenging. So we hired community members. We now have 3 projects in which the city paid.
That's a good one, Stephen. Yeah, because you have the buy-in. They're going to go into the community. People know them. They trust them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Never thought of that one.
Yeah, and they're paid hourly, and they help us draft like how we'll engage the community, because they have the networks, the history, and that's new to us. It's not. I know that other cities have been doing it, but I can tell you, as staff have come back, they're like, "Whoa, that's a lot of release of control," you know. So it's makes people feel a little uneasy, but halfway into the project, they were like, this is the best idea we ever did, because now I know what I'm going into and expectations have been set. You have direct communication networks versus figuring out like who's the alpha in the community and so forth. So it's really, really interesting, but it challenged our staff to be, let's let some of this go. So.
Well, we're right at time. I know, Patrick, you had some last words, and I also did want to let everybody know that I've put Patrick's and Stephen's email addresses in the chat. They're a little bit odd, but just copy and paste them to whatever you need to do. But Patrick, did you want to close us out here?
I was just giving Bentley a big old high five for hiring community members.
Love it.
That's it. That was my Stephen Bentley high five.
Big old high five all the way around then. How's that? We'll end it on that note.
Yeah, we can email or call. Patrick and I nerd out over this stuff. So some people don't like to ask questions, and I'll take any emails and phone calls to see how we can help everybody on the call. So.
That is wonderful. Thank all 3 of you for joining us today. I can say that I know I personally learned something, and I'm excited about the next 2 sessions. That last poll that I put up as we quickly roll off was about the importance of developing operating budgets as a part of your CIP projects. And I know we'll talk about that later on, but I just wanted to get a feel of how many individuals were actually doing that or not doing that. Again, on behalf of Women in Parks and Recreation, this was a phenomenal way to get through is today Tuesday, hump day, as we look forward to a wonderful weekend. But we know in Parks and Recreation, it never stops. So again, thank you for today, and we look forward to our next 2 sessions. I think the next one will be done on March 9th, same time, and then April 13th. And we will make sure we get that information out to you. Bring a friend along. It's open for guys and gals. It's all about learning and making our communities better. Thank you.
Thank you all.